In this video, you will see numerous witnesses other than the four Gospels disappeared or have been suppressed. The Church destroyed evidence in every possible way, has nothing from 72% of the disciples, the vast majority, has nothing from 91% of the texts known to have originally existed. Yet the Church claims unanimous consensus. Several narrations from early Christian origins differ from canonic texts concerning the crucifixion and resurrection, therefore confirming the Quran, Surah 4, Ayah 157, they disagreed and were full of doubts, and more.
I seek refuge in Allah from Satan, the outcast. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
This discussion is in 5 sections or videos. The first video, examining how to apply the historical method for this study to the New Testament and to the Quran. The second video, discussing why the Quran denied the crucifixion and did not let the issue pass. The third video, answering the objection, how would God allow such confusion as mentioned in the Quran? The fourth video, cross-examining the witnesses, the four Gospels. This current and final video, investigating about other witnesses or texts that may have disappeared, been suppressed, or otherwise, followed by the general conclusion. We finished section or video number 4, and will now begin video number 5. Investigating about the missing witnesses and texts that disappeared, have been suppressed, or otherwise. Introduction. Let us start with an apologetics reflections about the crucifixion ayah.
Now, there is no authentic interpretation of this one ayah to be found in the Hadith literature. Now that to me is amazing. No Muslim for 200 years could remember anything Muhammad said about this one ayah, and that troubles me. Why isn't there any commentary on this?
First, so now we have a new rule. Any ayah that has no interpretation poses a problem. This is a very weird criterion, which we can find nowhere, not in the historical method, not in Islamic Hadith methodology, and surely not in the Church's method of evaluating their own texts. They just need to canonize them in order to allow us to read them, while all others get burnt. Second, since when does it trouble apologists that there is no interpretation? All New Testament verses have no interpretation from Jesus whatsoever. This indeed should trouble and amaze them according to this new brilliant criterion. Third, he is amazed that Muslims didn't line up around the Prophet in masses, asking him to interpret this ayah, just to oblige Dr. White and prevent him from being troubled. Well, obviously they didn't deem that it was among their top priorities. So how can this be of any significance? Indeed, the companions usually did not pester the Prophet with questions unless it was of immediate concern toward applying the Quran in their daily lives. Otherwise, it was usually the Prophet who took the initiative concerning what ayahs to comment about. In fact, he precisely warned them, "Do not over-question me like previous nations did with their own prophets." The Quran and sayings of the Prophet presented themselves as texts of guidance, not as a comprehensive historical reference encyclopedia. Fourth, interpretations and details are provided by the Quran itself. Islamic rules of exegesis, tafseer, prefer to interpret and explain the Quran through the Quran itself, whenever such additional texts, i.e. ayahs, are available. We doubt any sound rule of exegesis to be different. Surah 4, Ayah 158, "But Allah lifted him up unto himself. Allah is ever mighty, wise." Surah 3, Ayah 55, "Behold, Allah said, O Jesus, I am returning you back to me and lifting you unto myself, and purifying you from the falsehoods of those who disbelieve. Surah 19, Ayah 33. Peace on me the day I was born, the day I die, i.e. after the second coming, and the day I shall be raised alive, i.e. on the day of resurrection. So the Quran itself gives the interpretation. Jesus was lifted up unto Allah, was returned to Him, purified from false accusations and blasphemies, will return and die normally, then will be resurrected with all mankind. Fifth, the words no authentic interpretation.
There is no authentic interpretation of this one ayah.
The words no authentic interpretation seem to dismiss several narrations available about this ayah. But Ibn Kathir mentions the narration of substitution and says this is an authentic chain to Ibn Abbas. And since when do apologists apply Islamic rules of authentication in evaluating historical events? All they have to do to stop being troubled is to assume we canonize them, since canonizing is acceptable to them. Of course, there are other narrations, the ones he's trying to dismiss. Some of their narrators are not authenticated according to Islamic criteria. This makes the narrations not authentic. But additionally, the narrations come initially from Christian sources, and such sources do not include information about individual narrators all the way up to Jesus or his disciples. That's also why they are not authentic according to our criteria. Nonetheless, these narrations remain of higher authenticity than the New Testament itself, since they escape the Church's alterations in all their stages, and we will discuss them in the following point 5. Traces still remain. Sixth, the inconsistent standards of apologists are extremely ironic. On one hand, they get troubled about the lack of one interpretation in our texts, yet they do not lose any sleep about the lack of Gospels from 8 of Jesus' disciples. That's 72% of them. And we showed that even the initial 4 were altered and were not even written by the disciples. Let us quote Dr. White himself when he asks a magnificent question, but about the wrong issue.
Where are the disciples of Jesus that do not believe these things? Show me a single disciple of Jesus who actually denied the crucifixion. They all believed in it. Was it because they had all been fooled? And again, if he was not crucified and yet he met with his disciples after that time of crucifixion, then there would have been disciples contradicting this story. Unless you're going to say that those true disciples were all just swallowed up or taken off the planet or didn't have the guts to stand up for the truth.
But Jesus ordered all 11 disciples to spread his message. The Church claims only 3 totally unique Gospels by anonymous authors. So where are the teachings of the other 8 true disciples? Did they get lazy? Or as Dr. White just correctly put it,
those true disciples were all just swallowed up or taken off the planet.
So we repeat Dr. White's questions. Were they all just swallowed up or taken off the planet? Or were their writings actually destroyed and burnt by the Nicene Council? This lack of whole Gospels is what should trouble apologetics, not the lack of one ayah's interpretation.
Manuscripts, we got more than about 25,000 full or partial manuscripts for the New Testament.
So the Church boasts of tens of thousands of manuscripts by anonymous authors, attributing them mainly to 4 of the 11 disciples, 2 of whom have been proven by historians to share a common source. So there are tens of thousands mainly from 3 anonymous sources, but 0 manuscripts from the remaining 72% of the disciples. In contrast, Muslims have narrations from all the close companions. We do not have the incriminating gap of 0 narrations from 72% of the close companions. We have tens of thousands of hadiths across hundreds of thousands of chains. Imam Ahmad memorized 1 million variations, uniformly spreading across every category of the companions. In fact, the other witnesses, the other Gospels, were suppressed. 1. Where are Jesus' words after the crucifixion? The New Testament claims he remained 40 days with the disciples, yet we have only a few statements from him for that period. What was he doing during that time? We are all sure this was a crucial period. It is not a cheap shot to ask again, was he just sightseeing? Relatively to how long he stayed, we have almost no record of what he said. Anybody returning after such circumstances would have had a lot to say. Anybody in a few minutes would have said much more than was reported about Jesus during 40 days, as the New Testament claims, Acts 1:3. Only a few sentences in 40 crucial farewell days, containing an equal or less amount of information than our prophet's farewell sermon, which as we measured needs only 1 minute to read. Therefore, much of what Jesus said disappeared, and that's not only concerning after the crucifixion event. Please remember that all words of Jesus in the New Testament amount to about 1 newspaper column. 2. Why was Paul so ominous in his warning? He was almost threatening. If Christ has not been raised, your faith is in vain. 1 Corinthians 15, 14, and 17. This is proof that there were people who did not believe in the resurrection. Severe warnings must be for a cause. The mother does not warn so severely her normal child about the dangers of not eating enough. She warns the child who usually does not eat enough. Therefore, Paul was fighting an opposite current, people who did not believe in the resurrection. So where are their writings? Who were they? All relevant information has conveniently disappeared, no thanks to efforts like those of the Nicene Council. 3. Paul is indeed our witness that there were other Gospels. Paul admits that other Gospels were being preached, contrary to his own. This obviously disturbed him so much that he went as far as cursing them. He said, "If anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to the one you received, let him be accursed." Galatians 1:9. 4. The church destroyed or caused the loss of numerous texts and gospels. Based on The Cross and the Crescent by Gerald Dirks, we list in our footnote 41 non-canonic gospels which were once an integral part of early Christianity. This is still not a complete listing of such gospels, much less of other texts. He wrote on page 83 and 84, which we show in blue, "In marked contrast, the New Testament canon includes only 4 Gospels, i.e. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The contrast is quite dramatic and illustrates the wealth of early Christian scripture, which the early Christian church found convenient to ignore, ban, or destroy once it began its campaign to construct a unified dogma, theology, and set of beliefs. In short, only 4 of over 45 Gospels found their way into the New Testament, a meager 9% of what was possible. The other 91% is gone. Additionally, the fact that the Gospel of Barnabas was banned in the decree of Galatius establishes that there was a Gospel of Barnabas by at least the 6th century, and banning this Gospel clearly indicates that it included information detrimental to the Church's dogma. 5. Traces still remain of the other Gospels and texts. The Church's attempts to establish their dogma could not obliterate all traces of other streams, although these streams themselves got totally suppressed over time. So despite the Church's destruction of most of their own texts, Christian converts to Islam had possession of additional ones. Some were relayed to our scholars and thus fortunately survived. Our scholars such as Ka'b al-Ahbar and Wahb ibn Munabbih gathered and related numerous passages from Jewish and Christian sources. These included valuable texts which escaped the Church's destruction. Of course, the Church conveniently dismisses such texts as non-canonic, but Islamic hadiths were classified as authentic, weak, fabricated, etc., based on truthfulness of the narrator and on internal criticism of the texts, whereas canonic means, here is what I want you to believe, and this is what I don't want you to believe. It has nothing to do with academic, critical evaluation of texts. It has nothing to do with rationality. It has nothing to do with mental autonomy. It has nothing to do with truth. Shouldn't we then reject the testimony of every non-Jewish Christian? They were not canonic. Apologists may answer, but we accept Josephus, and he wasn't a Christian. We reply, the texts of Josephus were in the church's possession, and we showed, such as concerning the Gospel of John, how the Pauline church is best at editing and even forging texts to fit its dogma. For example, Ibn Kathir quotes Ibn Ishaq about a Christian convert to Islam who related that a disciple volunteered to take Jesus' place. On first impression, one may question this substitution on moral grounds, but our texts from Christian origin explain that Jesus and his disciples were threatened to be all killed unless Jesus gave himself up. Jesus promised his company in paradise to whoever will volunteer to take his likeness. Thus the main purpose was to save the whole group. Of course, if nobody volunteered, neither Muslims nor Christians doubt that Jesus would have delivered himself. He wouldn't have let the whole group get killed. And Al-Tabari relates that Jesus descended after he was raised, while Mary and another woman were weeping by the trunk of the cross. He asked them, "Why are you weeping?" They said, "About you." He told them, "I was not killed nor crucified, but God raised me and honored me." And he asked them to tell his disciples about him, and to meet him at a specific place at night. The disciples came to that place, and the mountain became full of light upon his descent there. Then he told them to invite people to his religion, and to worship their Lord, and sent them to the nations. There were other scriptures indeed, which were with converts, whereby these texts had no more value to them, so they did not continue protecting them from generation to the next, and recopying worn-out texts when needed. With Christian individuals sticking to the church's doctrine, whereby these non-canonic texts also lost their value to them and got neglected until they disappeared with the passage of time. Within reach of the church, which, as we mentioned, avidly destroyed them completely. Other such texts are of great value. It is worth mentioning that similar texts from early Christian converts to Islam prove of great value since they help understand much more about Jesus. For example, our texts, citing Wahb, mention that in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus told his disciples to pray with him for his safety. The Gospels just mention that he told them to keep watch, which understresses his earnestness in wanting to be saved and his humility, typically in the New Testament author's fashion of trying to raise the stature of Jesus. Mark 1:45 mentions that after the man spread the news about the miracles, Jesus could no longer openly enter a town, but was out in desolate places. But our texts, cited by Ibn Kathir, are more explicit that Jesus moved around a lot in order to stay away from harm of his enemies, which better clarifies the background about the miracle of turning water into wine, as we will see next. Another text, citing Ibn Abbas, explains the miracle of turning water into wine. First, that holding daily banquets was forced on people by some bully ruler in a village to feed him and his soldiers. The Jews refused Jesus' message and expelled him, so he kept roaming with his mother from place to place. They reached that village and were generously hosted by a person there, whose turn it was to hold the banquet. Next, that Mary then learned their host was out of wine and would be punished. She told Jesus about it, implying that he performed a miracle. Jesus merely answered, "O mother, if I do that, there will be harm." Publicizing his miracles in such a gathering would jeopardize his safety. He repeatedly asked not to tell about his miracles. Mark 1:42-44, Luke 5:12-16, Luke 8:56, Matthew 8:4, Matthew 9:28-30, Mark 7:31-37, and Mark 8:30. She replied, "Do not mind, he did us a favor and was generous to us." So Jesus said, "Tell him to fill the water pots with water." Then he went ahead and performed the miracle. These details are magnificent, while John's Gospel creates unanswerable questions about Jesus' irritability and motive for the stunning self-contradiction, harshly rebuking his mother only to perform the miracle immediately after. 1. The host was in a difficult situation and Mary wanted to return a favor. 2. Jesus simply did not want to over-publicize his miracles. He was in a large gathering, close to informers, not in the open country. 3. He did not disrespect his mother in any way. 4. When she told him not to mind, he went against his own preference, against his care for personal safety. 5. He splendidly obliged the wish of his mother, as described in the Holy Quran. He has made me kind to my mother. Surah 19, Ayah 32. Whoever altered the Gospel of John explicitly stated his purpose to spread his doctrine. These are written so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. John 20:30. All over this altered Gospel we see differences from the other Gospels, clearly trying to inflate the stature of Jesus, peace be upon him. Thus in John 2:1-8, the alterations attempt to give him an air of superiority, but in doing so the author forgets that Jesus is an example of proper behavior, to say the least. Such alterations reflect a severely deficient opinion of what high stature is. They end up with the false image of a bully disrespecting his mother, then performing the miracle anyway. We say whoever altered John's Gospel committed a crime, whereby he depicted Jesus as the opposite of what he really was. Any person who deeply loves his mother would know the reason for our indignation. If we previously considered this Gospel as possibly authentic, we would throw it away after noticing this crime. Therefore, wouldn't we all love to have much more of these other texts? They make us understand more about Jesus and his true message. They would unveil where manipulations have most likely happened in the New Testament. They give more proof that other Gospels existed but were lost. Of course, apologists will point out that our accounts do not all agree. Some mention that the substitute was a volunteer. Others mention he was Judas. Our response is that the confusion originates in our Christian sources. It is not caused by us. The confusion proves that these Christian sources disagree. Therefore, this proves the Quran that there was disagreement. Those who disagree concerning it are in doubt thereof. Surah 4, Ayah 157. For those interested, the Muslim Jesus by Tarif Khalidi contains 303 such accounts which, having escaped censorship of the Nicene Council and the like, fill a glaring gap in the New Testament, concentrating on the teachings of Jesus and his personality as the patron of asceticism and the superb moral, spiritual, and social role model, instead of manipulating and/or suppressing texts in order to promote a specific dogma. Jesus used to eat the leaves of the trees, reads one saying, dress in hair shirts, and sleep wherever night found him. He had no child who might die, no house which might fall into ruin, nor did he save his lunch for his dinner, or his dinner for his lunch. He used to say, each day brings with it its own sustenance. Mr. White also ridicules similar sources, that Jesus was lifted to heaven after being saved from the crucifixion.
But most Muslims I know believe this means that God took Jesus. In fact, I've had Muslims make entire arguments about, well, you know, in the place where Jesus and the disciples met in the Mount of Olives, they found the cave that they would have slept in, and there's a hole in the middle. That's how Jesus got out. Was Allah brought him up through the hole in the middle of the roof.
But don't Christians also believe Jesus ascended? Where did he ascend to, if not unto God, precisely as the Quran states? Are we worrying about the exit point, through the roof or through mere air? Yes, God, who parted the sea for Moses, could have lifted Jesus to heaven from the floor or from the ceiling, or he could have made him disappear that very morning, even the day before. So are we to fuss about how and why each miracle happened? How and why Jesus walked on water, Why not simply glide on air? Why spit in the blind's eyes instead of simply praying for him to be cured? And this is a serious question, not merely rhetorical like the above. Why curse the fig tree? He could have commanded it to bear fruit, and it would have done so that very instant. After all, Jesus commanded the dead Lazarus to raise, and he raised immediately. Or have we forgotten the Old Testament prophecy? He will command his angels to guard you. They will lift you up in their hands. Psalms 91, 10 through 16.
And then we had finally Bart Ehrman, where he says, well, Bart Ehrman believes Jesus is crucified. Yes, he does. But doesn't believe he rose from the dead. Why not? Why doesn't he? Because he's a naturalistic materialist. That's why. Because he's a naturalistic materialist. Stop reading Bart Ehrman and go find someone who has the same level of faith in the text of the Bible you have in the Quran.
So apologists are to guide us about which people are canonic so we can read them or not? We prefer to stick to the guidance from the Prophet's advice. Wisdom is the believer's quest. Wherever he finds it, he is more entitled to it. Incidentally, that was a great idea for apologists themselves, to stop reading Bart Ehrman. This naturalistic materialist, as White put it, seems to have influenced many of them. They too seem to have lost their faith in the power of God to produce miracles, such as saving Jesus and raising him to heaven. Summary about investigating other witnesses. Christian apologists claim they have unanimous evidence and that Muslims have no evidence, even though the church destroyed evidence in every possible way. Has nothing from 72% of the disciples, has nothing from 91% of the texts known to be originally available. This is like somebody in court who destroyed 91% of the evidence, yet claims his opponent contradicts the unanimous 9% evidence. And even though Muslim scholars have narrations of Christian origin showing that Christians had streams that believed Jesus was saved from the crucifixion, these narrations from early Christian origins differ from canonic texts, therefore confirming the Quran that they disagreed and were full of doubts. Surah 4, Ayah 157. General conclusion. 1. Additional objection. Let's first listen to this additional objection.
What says otherwise? 40 Arabic words from 600 years later from someone who had never even read either the Old Testament or the New Testament. That's all you've got.
But just before that, Dr. White said,
and you see, the historical record can only get you so far. The historical record can only get you so far.
Dr. White and other Christian apologists admits that historical records can only get you so far. Yet he conveniently forgot it seconds later when he spoke of 600 years later from someone who had never even read the Bible. Mr. White, like other Christian apologists, conveniently dismisses that the New Testament itself was authenticated, canonized, nearly 4 centuries after the events, 7 centuries for the Orthodox Church, and more than 1,400 miles away from where they took place. So let us see with him how historical records indeed cannot get us as far as revelations can. It turns out the Quran is surprisingly qualified. Indeed, it correctly spoke of the Pharaoh's body being saved.
But this day we save thee in thy body, that thou mayest be a portent for those after thee. Lo, most of mankind are heedless of our portents.
This statement is a revelation, not a historical record. Indeed, the Pharaoh's body was recovered and was put on display for the world to see. That was thousands of years after the Pharaoh, not the mere 600 years that Mr. White thought significant. And yes, this ayah too was recited by a man who had never even read about ancient Egypt. So why make this big commotion about the Quran giving another revelation, this time concerning what happened to Jesus? Since this ayah also states that most of mankind are heedless of the signs of God, Muslims therefore expect skeptics to laboriously argue about this specific Pharaoh's identity, the same way they argue about every other miracle in the Quran. Is the mummy that of the Pharaoh of the Exodus or not? So let them also argue this. 1. It was unknown to humanity at the time of the Prophet that any Pharaoh's body got preserved. So what on earth makes an illiterate man 1400 years ago in the midst of the desert speak about any Pharaoh's body being saved? Did he plagiarize the Bible according to the favorite refrain of apologists? Or was it common knowledge, the favorite refrain of skeptics? Did he get it from Aristotle or Galen? Maybe from the Romans or some Viking sailors? Or maybe from the Incas whose existence was yet unknown? 2. But guess what? He coupled it with an additional tour de force, a promotional offer, 2 for the price of 1. The same ayah also correctly stated that the Pharaoh's body will later become a sign. This discovery happened more than 1,000 years after the Quran. Indeed, until Champollion unlocked the pyramids in the 19th century, humanity didn't even know of any Pharaoh's mummy being preserved. So what on earth made this unlearned man recite a future prophecy about something he didn't know? Was it also common knowledge that mummies of the pharaohs will be discovered in the future? We respect the Old Testament and believe it is based on God's words. But there is absolutely no prophecy there, nor in any other revealed text, which comes even close to this stunning double prophetic miracle of the Quran.
جدد البيع للرسول الهادي طه نبينا يا خير العباد جدد البيع.
So yes, the Quran is a revelation which spoke about Jesus in the past, like it spoke about the Pharaoh in the past and future. And we saw in this series of lectures the myriad of proofs why the Quran is correct in denying the crucifixion. 2. Summary of these 5 videos. At the beginning of this series, it was correctly mentioned that credibility must be given to the report that's closest to the situation. This is according to the historical method. But we also saw that the New Testament fails many criteria of the historical method. The New Testament contradicts the Old Testament, which came before it, about issues where the Old Testament should take precedence. The Quran is not presenting itself as a historical document on this issue. It is presenting itself as a revelation, telling us what actually happened. The Quran did not let the issue just go for many reasons, mainly to vindicate Jesus as a true prophet and confirming Old Testament prophecies that he will be saved. God did not mislead. It is the church that misleads itself and its followers. After cross-examining the witnesses, we found that according to the historical method, the first witnesses were not qualified. The gospel writers had motivation for providing some kind of bias, or there was outright lying and fabrication to promote a specific doctrine. Numerous other witnesses disappeared or have been suppressed. The church destroyed evidence in every possible way, has nothing from 72% of the disciples, has nothing from 91% of the texts known to have originally existed. And we also saw how correct the Quran was about the confusion and doubts, and that it was made to appear, shubbiha lahum. Indeed, we saw from the New Testament itself, see video 4.6 and 7, the extraordinary failure to recognize afflicting disciples like an epidemic. Jesus rebuking the disciples repeatedly for not understanding, especially after the presumed resurrection. Disciples thinking they saw a spirit, some worshipping him, but some doubting. Matthew 28:16. 3. What to do now? The Quran tells Muslims what they need to know about Jesus, that he was a great prophet and that he was not crucified. The crucifixion ayah aims to vindicate Jesus, not to provide a historical record about details of the crucifixion. For those interested, we mention in our footnote here some comments about the theory of substitution and about the swoon theory, whereby Jesus seemed to die but swooned. He was only unconscious. If you love Jesus, the solution is simple. 1. It starts by reviewing his stern warning. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father. Many will say, Did we not? Did we not? Then will I declare to them, Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Matthew 7:21 through 23. Salvation for Pauline Christianity is to only glorify Jesus, precisely as he criticized, calling him Lord, Lord, but not following the law, the will of God. But we see from his words that Jesus is not after us glorifying him. He is after us doing the will of God. Actions are needed too, not only faith. He clearly stated the decisive factor, doing the will of God. He clearly stated that glorifying him by saying, Lord, Lord, is not enough, and that he will reject workers of lawlessness, those who do not do the will of the Father, those who suppress, burn and ban books, disfigure texts against their meaning. This is work against following the law, workers of lawlessness. But what is the will of the Father other than the law? Isn't the law that the Father gave precisely what he wants us to do? Isn't it his will, the will of the Father, which Jesus is talking about? Or is the law not the will, but merely some capricious whims, which God doesn't seriously care whether we follow or not? The 10 Commandments are part of the law, but not the whole law. Therefore, following only the 10 Commandments, as Pauline Christianity wants, does not fulfill Jesus' requirement of doing the will of the Father. The will of the Father includes the whole law. And by the way, when the law is not obeyed perfectly, God mentions in the Old Testament that if we commit sins, then we must still turn back and he will forgive us. If my people shall turn from their wicked ways, then will I forgive their sin. 2 Chronicles 7:14. 2. We have the responsibility of critical reasoning. Let us reflect about how North Korea's Camp 14 prisoners, mentioned in video 4, view the world, and why do they do so?
Did anybody ever explain to you why you were in a camp?
No, never, because I was born there. I just thought that those people who carry guns were born to carry guns, and prisoners like me were born as prisoners.
Growing up, did you ever think about escaping?
That never crossed my mind.
It never crossed your mind?
No, never. What I thought was that the society outside the camp would be similar to that inside the camp.
You thought everybody lived in a prison camp like this?
Yes. So the prisoner views that the whole world is like his camp. For him, this is the truth. It is taken for granted. This is his worldview. And the usual Christian views that the truth is what he hears at church. This is taken for granted. This is his worldview. The prisoner views that he was born to be a prisoner, and the usual Christian views that he is born with the original sin, etc. The prisoner's misperception is because this is all he heard, he did not hear another side of the story. And the usual Christian does not usually hear the other side of the story from unbiased sources. Islam is severely distorted by the media and by the church. Furthermore, in cases like that, the prisoner has usually no reason to challenge the authority around him, and the usual Christian has usually no reason, nor the time, to challenge that of the church. As for us, we have the responsibility to scrutinize any claim, whether coming from a clergyman or a Muslim sheikh, instead of endorsing it without reflection. So please review the New Testament and look at the explicit meanings of Jesus' words, without allowing others to speak for him. Jesus was one of God's greatest prophets. He was not deficient in relaying his teachings, whereby he needed others to speak for him. He cared for our salvation. He was not after tricking us by using obscure expressions, or by suppressing any important doctrine, waiting for Paul and the church to divulge to us later. If it was important, he must have said it clearly and unequivocally. Trinity, divinity of Jesus, redemption through crucifixion, original sin, etc. Just like God's unequivocal commandment in the Old Testament, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord." Indeed, Jesus said, the first of all the commandments is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord." And the second is, "There is none other commandment greater than these." None. No Trinity, no divinity of Jesus, no original sin, etc. is more important than that first commandment. If Jesus did not mention it clearly, then it was not essential, or it was just invented by others. 3. Ask yourself the billion-dollar question. Will Jesus rebuke me on the day of judgment? Why did you think I did not need interpreters to improve upon my words? Why did you give priority to my words over the words of others? Why did you insist on following my words literally, and not according to figurative or allegorical claims of others? Why did you think I would have made it clear if it was important? And please ask yourself, on what basis shall we allow opinions to overrule the clear words of Jesus, whether they be my opinion, yours, or Paul's? And when you read self-appointed false prophets basing religion against following the law, remember that Satan is the enemy of the law, while Jesus and his disciples meticulously followed the law. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you? Luke 6:46. What did Jesus tell us other than following the law? And please ask yourself, if I insist on rejecting Pauline Christianity for relaxing the law, who did Jesus just threaten to deny, me or them? And please ask yourself too, I want to do what Jesus told me, so what am I left with if I follow Paul? What commandments of Jesus himself did Paul promote? None. Yes, Paul spoke about Jesus, referred to him, over-glorified him, but he absolutely never promoted any commandment from him. Please check for yourself. We are sure any person who sincerely loves Jesus will agree. If I follow Paul, I will end up with nothing from Jesus. I will only end up with claims about Jesus. And since Paul is the actual founder of modern Christianity, here again is some of his doctrine. The law arouses sinful passions. Sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. Apart from the law, sin lies dead. See Romans 7:5 and 8. By acknowledging the law, this makes us control our passions, not the other way. Serious doubts are cast against the morality of a person who blames the law for arousing his sinful passions. It is not the law that arouses sinful passions. It is accepting Satan's temptations that arouses them. How can Paul blame the law of producing sin and covetousness in him, when it is only through the law that we can define what sin is? This will end the last of our 5-video series. We do not claim all our thoughts to be infallible. We try to analyze logically the topic to the best of our ability, resting on the premise that we were created by God in His image, i.e., our logic and our sense of justice. We also rested on another premise, that prophets, especially Jesus, peace and mercy be upon him, are truthful and of a sane and stable personality, models for all mankind. Although we quoted the modern historical method, yet just like Christians, we accept the possibility of miracles in our analysis, while the modern historical method does not set any criteria for analyzing them. We pray Allah this was all of benefit to people sincerely seeking the truth.
The superb affinity between Jesus and Muhammad deserves special mention. Peace and mercy be upon them both. From the side of Jesus, we saw in great detail how he foretold about Muhammad. See video 3.25. And at the start of 1 John 2, Jesus is correctly mentioned as the advocate for those who may have sinned. But Jesus was not the only advocate. In John 14:16, he foretold about Muhammad, another advocate, to help us and stay with us forever, i.e. that Muhammad's detailed law and guidance will be preserved through the centuries. And Muhammad informed us how he himself will be mankind's advocate in general and his nations in particular. We also saw how Jesus foretold about the nation of Islam in Matthew 21:43. We saw his message about worshiping God and doing his will. And finally, we saw how Jesus foretold of the mass deception to happen in his name, that many will mislead many in his name, and that Jesus will reject them as workers of lawlessness. A stunning preview 6 centuries before the Quran, Surah 1, Ayah 7, nor the path of those who have gone astray, وَلَضَّالِّينَ, explained by several hadith to intend Christians, of course, centuries after Jesus. Such is the stunning affinity between these two illustrious prophets. From his side, Prophet Muhammad, as a carrier of the Quran, unlike the New Testament, he vindicated Jesus about the accusation of being accursed through crucifixion. More than that, the Quran informed that Jesus was mercy wherever he was. Surah 19, Ayah 31. And in the same ayah, the Quran beautifully vindicated Jesus about disrespecting and bullying his mother. Peace and mercy be upon him. Alayhi salatu wassalam.
The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, I am more worthy of Jesus, son of Mary, than all people in this world and the hereafter. There is no prophet between us, and prophets are sons of one father. Their mothers are different, but their religion is one. Bukhari, Muslim, Ahmad, and others. And he said, whoever believes in Jesus, then believes in me, will have double the reward. Bukhari. Wassalamu alaikum.